Let me paint a picture for you of who these guys were. They're really fun to study. The Magi were in the Far East, probably in Babylon or Persia, in that area. They were steeped in the academics and the religious traditions of those countries, Babylon and Persia. And as I already said, that's nowhere near a biblical worldview at all, or lifestyle. Their lifestyle and religion was a mixture of sorcery and divination, superstition, astrology, science, math, and studying religious texts and prophecy. Stereotypically, we might describe the Magi this way. The Magi were highly educated and super smart, but superstitious, sorcery practicing, tea leaf reading, stargazing, dream interpreting, scientist, mathematician, historian, astrologer, priests from the East. Kind of an interesting group of people. Not the kind of people you would be the first one who you would think would be in the first in line to worship Jesus. But these were. That's what I mean. It's so unique. It's so interesting. And honestly, as I began to spend time in this text, I kind of got the idea that the ones who made the trip, it's not all the Magi came, but the ones who made the trip kind of break that mold. I really think it was a significant thing that not all the Magi did come. Only this group of Magi really felt compelled to make this trip, to seek out the Christ, and to make this journey across hostile territory with a treasure, to offer it to the King and give him glory and worship him. You see, let's just kind of bring this to our world and how things work. It's one thing to sit around and talk about the Scriptures. It's one thing to talk about things in an academic way. You know, can you see the Magi? These guys are total academics. They're sitting around study hall in Babylon U. And they're sipping their coffee and they're talking about the texts and prophecies and astrology and whatever else they study. And one of them says, you know, I saw that star the other night. That's pretty cool. You think that might be that messianic thing that it's talking about that king way over there in Israel? Yeah, that might be. And it's fun to have discussions about those things and compare texts and notes and things from class and all that. It's a whole other thing to say, I'm going there. Right? Because here's what we got to understand. It took them 2 years to get this trip together. Because here's the deal. We always say there's 3. That's tradition. There's a lot more than 3 guys who made this trip. Okay? Because they've got to get supplies and food and camels, unless they just want to walk every step, which riding a camel doesn't seem like a whole lot better. Have you seen the camel at Road to Bethlehem? Everybody said, don't go to the camel. He'll either bite you or spit on you. I said, okay, I'll just watch him from here. That's cool. But, this is not a luxury trip. They had to get all these supplies together. On top of that, they had to amass what really would be a small fortune in terms of the gold and the incense and the myrrh. These are gifts for a king. And as Danny alluded to, it was God's provision, many believe, for Joseph and them, who later would have to finance a trip to Egypt to escape Herod. So now and then they're going to take 2 months and walk from Babylon to Israel with no guarantee that they'll find him. I mean, it's like, hey, let's walk to Los Angeles to Smithville and find this kid. How easy is that going to be, right? But they say, I'm going to go. And I just see something really unique in that. I see something going on. They're compelled. They're moved. It's almost like the Holy Spirit's involved. Wow. And they want to go find this king and worship him. Now, there's some really interesting passages in the book of Daniel that help us understand who the Magi were. Daniel was super familiar with the Magi. And let me make sure you know about Daniel, okay? Daniel, of course, is one of the books in the Old Testament. And it's during what's called the exile period of God's people. When God's people didn't keep their eyes on the Lord, there were times when God had to allow them to be overrun by enemies in order to get their attention. And at one of these points, about 500 years before Jesus, God used Babylon and a king named Nebuchadnezzar to sweep down and conquer Judah and carry off many of its people into exile or slavery in Babylon, which is where these Magi were from. So about 500 years before Jesus, this happens, and Daniel is among the Hebrew boys who are taken off as slaves. Well, the king was very interested in any of those that showed promise, and Daniel was among the brightest of those, and so he put him in charge of the Magi. Listen to what it says here in Daniel chapter 5, verse 11. During Nebuchadnezzar's reign, this man, that is, this is a reference to Daniel, Daniel was found to have insight and understanding and wisdom like that of the gods, from the Babylonians' perspective. And Nebuchadnezzar made him chief over all of the magicians and the enchanters and the astrologers and the fortune tellers of Babylon. Those are the magicians, or those are the Magi. So Daniel's in charge of them. And so through Daniel, this group of people, Daniel's a great man of God. Daniel loves the Lord. It's an incredible story to read about Daniel in the lion's den and all of that. But Daniel would have taught them about God. He would have taught them about the prophecies having to do with Messiah and who the Messiah was going to be, and even about this star that would rise. This isn't in your notes if you want to write this down and check it out later. In Numbers chapter 24, verse 17, there's this little obscure verse, Numbers 24:17, and it says, a star will rise over Jacob. And it goes on to speak of one who will come. Awesome little passage. Now here's what's cool about this. This is 500 years before it actually takes place that Daniel works with the Magi. So feel this. Our nation's roughly 250 years old. Twice that long, okay? For twice that long, after Daniel passes, generation after generation of Magi passed on to the next generation what Daniel had taught them about these prophecies, along with everything else that they studied, about this little passage, about this star that would rise. And for 500 years, they'd go out and check out the horizon and watch the stars, which was part of their regular, practice. And one day, these Magi went out and said, there it is. Can you imagine? We're the ones. We're the generation. And there it is. And they recognized it for what it was. They saw, this is it. And so they don't just sit down with their buddies and talk about it. They organize a trip. They said, we have to go to Israel. We have to go find this child. We have to amass, gifts that are worthy of a king. We have to get protection and resources to make this 2-month journey so that we can go find this baby. And this is amazing to me. They're going to go 2 years of planning or whatever, and 2 months of travel and walking across so that they can do this. Here's your gifts. Let's walk back. I mean, think about that. That is amazing. But they were compelled when they saw this star. They said, that's the one Daniel talked about. That's it. This is the king. Matthew chapter 2, verse 2. There's some irony worked in here when you know the backstory. It says, so they traveled to Jerusalem, the head city, the capital city of Israel, which makes sense. Right? If you were coming to America and you wanted to know what was going on in terms of the country, you'd go to Washington because you'd be under the illusion that they knew what was going on in the country. All right? Okay? So nothing's changed. Okay? Nothing's changed. They're under the illusion that Herod has a clue. And they think if anybody knows about the prophecies and the coming king in Israel, the folks in this building ought to know, right? The palace. So they go in and they ask, where is the one who has been born the King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east. You guys surely know about that, right? Aren't you as excited as we are? I mean, we just walked 2 months to get here. What are you guys doing to celebrate it? Nothing. They don't even know about it. Isn't this incredible? We have come to worship him. I just find it interesting that the people that lived in the backyard of Bethlehem, they didn't know. But some group totally removed that we would have probably written off and said, oh, they're not believers or whatever. They're the ones that traveled to come see him. So here they are. We've come to worship him. The word worship means to ascribe worth, to fall down before, and praise and adoration and surrender, and to lift him up. This is not just an academic field trip for a group of academics. This is a 2-year process, 2-month-long journey through hostile territory to bring treasures and worship to the King of Kings. We talk about gold and incense and myrrh and those gifts that were given, and that's wonderful and that's true. But the greatest gift of the Magi was none of that. It was their surrendered heart to Jesus. That's what drove them. That's what compelled them. That's our gift as well. These Magi recognized this baby for who he was. That this was Emmanuel. This is God with us. This is the King of Kings. This is the Anointed One. And so they were compelled to seek him out. That's the operative word. To seek him out, pursue him, and worship him and glorify him.